In the distant corners of the galaxy where the stars twinkled over barren planets, the Zorath Empire reigned supreme. Their control was absolute, their reach stretching from one end of the universe to the other. The Empire's rule was built on fear, power, and oppression. All who dared to resist were crushed without mercy, their voices silenced beneath the weight of an endless war machine. However, in one small colony on the edge of Zorath-controlled space, a spark was igniting. The colony of Arkan's Reach had long been a forgotten backwater in the galaxy. However, for the people living there, it was home. They toiled under the heavy yoke of the Zorath Empire, but their spirits remained unbroken, for they had something the Empire did not: hope. Hope, even in the face of impossible odds. At the heart of the colony's growing resistance was Kaylin Starfire, a young woman with a burning fire inside her. She was known to her people for her courage and her quick wit, but above all, for her refusal to submit to the Zorath's tyranny. Kaylin had witnessed the Empire's cruelty firsthand. Her family had been taken from her by the Empire's soldiers when she was just a child. Now, as an adult, she had vowed to see them overthrown, no matter the cost. She had grown into a skilled tactician, studying the Empire's methods and learning to turn their own strength against them. It wasn't enough to merely fight the Zorath. Kaylin understood that they needed to strike a blow that would be felt across the entire galaxy. The first of these blows came when she led a surprise raid against a Zorath supply convoy. The mission had been dangerous, reckless even. The resistance forces, small in number and poorly equipped, had been up against a well-armed and well-trained Zorath military unit. But Kaylin had a plan. It was a plan built on deception, stealth, and the sheer will to win. As the convoy moved through the rocky, uninhabited plains of Arkan's Reach, Kaylin and her team launched a surprise attack from the shadows, taking the Zorath soldiers by complete surprise. The clash was quick but intense. Blasters fired, and the sound of explosions echoed across the landscape. The Zorath soldiers, unprepared for the ferocity of the Resistance's assault, scrambled to defend themselves. Kaylin fought with a passion that burned like a wildfire. Every movement, every strike, was calculated and precise. The Resistance hit hard and fast, overwhelming the Zorath forces and forcing them to retreat. Kaylin stood in the middle of the battlefield, breathing heavily as the last of the Zorath soldiers fled. Their supplies, their weapons, and their precious resources had been taken. The victory was theirs. As the Resistance gathered the spoils of war, Kaylin's heart raced with excitement. This was only the beginning. She had struck the first blow in what would become a long, hard-fought war for freedom. The people of Arkan's Reach would not bend to the will of the Empire any longer. However, the victory came at a cost. The Zorath Empire was not known for showing mercy, and Kaylin knew they would retaliate with everything they had. The small victory would draw the Empire's attention to Arkan's Reach in a way they had never experienced before. It didn't take long for the Zorath to respond. Within days, their fleet arrived in orbit above Arkan's Reach. The Empire's might was on full display. Massive warships surrounded the colony, their guns trained on the planet below. The Zorath had come to send a message. Resistance would not be tolerated. The Empire's general, Vexnar, was notorious for his cruelty. His reputation had been built on the bodies of those who dared to oppose the Zorath. He did not care for the lives of the people he ruled. His only concern was crushing any hint of rebellion before it could spread. Vexnar wasted no time. He ordered a full-scale bombing of the colony. The people of Arkan's Reach watched in horror as their homes were reduced to rubble by the Zorath's relentless assault. The Resistance fighters, led by Kaylin, fought valiantly to protect their people, but they were outmatched. The Empire's ships were too powerful, their forces too numerous. Kaylin stood in the wreckage of what had once been the heart of the colony, watching as the Empire's ships loomed overhead like vultures. A bitter taste filled her mouth as she realized the cost of her defiance. Her actions had sparked something far bigger than she had intended. The Zorath Empire would now bring their full wrath to bear upon Arkan's Reach, and countless innocent lives would be lost in the process. Her heart burned with a mixture of anger and guilt. Had she made the right choice? Had she pushed too far, too fast? She didn't know, but one thing was certain. She would not back down. This war was no longer just about Arkan's Reach. It was about the future of the galaxy. And if the people of the galaxy wanted to be free, they would. And Kaelin met Kaelin in the war room, a small, dimly lit room filled with holographic maps and data projections. She stood with her arms crossed, her eyes narrowing as she observed the man who would be joining her cause. "So, you're the famous Admiral Rhine," Kaelin said, her voice skeptical but not unfriendly. "I've heard a lot about you. They say you're the best tactician in the galaxy." Kaelin nodded, his expression calm and collected. "I don't care for titles, Starfire. I care about winning this war, and I believe that with discipline and careful planning, we can turn the tide against the Zorath Empire." Kaelin raised an eyebrow. "Discipline, huh? I've led a few successful raids in my time, but I've never worried much about discipline. I act fast, strike hard, and get out before the enemy knows what hit them. Your kind of planning doesn't exactly fit with the way we do things." Kaelin's lips curled into a small smile. "And yet, the Zorath have wiped out entire colonies. They've crushed every resistance group that's dared to fight back. If you continue with your reckless approach, you'll lead the people of Arkan's Reach into the same fate." The words hit Kaelin harder than she expected. She had always believed that their passion and willingness to fight would be enough to defeat the Empire. But in that moment, she realized that Kaelin was right. Without strategy, their cause would fall apart. She had never seen the bigger picture. She had only ever focused on the fight in front of her. Taking a deep breath, Kaelin uncrossed her arms. "All right, Admiral, show me what you got." Kaelin wasted no time. He immediately began laying out his plans for the resistance, outlining a series of calculated strikes against key Zorath supply lines and military bases. Every move was carefully thought out, every decision made with precision. The more Kaelin listened, the more she understood the wisdom behind Kaelin's approach. Where she had seen only an opportunity for a quick victory, Kaelin saw a chance to cripple the Zorath Empire's resources and stretch their forces thin. He didn't just want to win a battle, he wanted to win the war. Days turned into weeks, and Kaelin found herself learning from Kaelin's disciplined tactics. Together, they began to orchestrate a series of successful operations, each one strategically, designed to weaken the Zorath Empire's hold on the galaxy. Kaelin's plans were slow and methodical, but they were proving effective. The resistance gained ground, retaking critical planets and disrupting the Empire's operations across the galaxy. The people, once oppressed and fearful, began to believe that victory was possible. Yet, as the weeks passed, the tension between Kaelin and Kaelin grew. Kaelin's fiery spirit often clashed with Kaelin's careful planning. She wanted to strike, quickly to take risks and push forward, but Kaelin always insisted on a more measured approach. It was frustrating for Kaelin, who had always trusted her gut and relied on her instincts to guide her. But with every victory, Kaelin could see the merit of Kaelin's discipline. She began to understand that in war, patience and preparation were just as important as bravery. One day, after a particularly heated argument over the next stage of their campaign, Kaelin stormed out of the war room, her frustration boiling over. She wandered through the quiet hallways of the base, trying to calm herself. She couldn't deny that Kaelin's strategy had been successful, but it felt too cold, too impersonal. She missed the days when she could rely on her gut to lead, her through battle, when the thrill of the fight was enough to carry her forward. But as she stood in the silence, Kaelin realized something. It wasn't Kaelin's discipline that she resented. It was the fear of losing herself in the process. She had always defined herself by her courage and her ability to fight without hesitation. But if they were to defeat the Zorath Empire, she would need to learn to embrace Kalen's discipline, to find a balance between her passion and his strategy. When Kalen returned to the war room, she found Kalen waiting for her, his expression unchanged. Without a word, she sat down beside him, ready to continue their work together. "We'll do it your way," Kalen said quietly. "But I need you to understand that my way has value too. We can't lose the heart of this fight." Kalen nodded. "I never wanted you to lose your spirit, Starfire, but together, we'll find the balance that can win this war." The two leaders, once so different, now stood united in their resolve. Together, they would forge a path forward, a path that combined Kalen's defiance and Kalen's discipline. And with each step, they moved closer to victory. The war against the Zorath Empire had now entered a dangerous phase. The galaxy had shifted into chaos, and every day seemed to bring new challenges for Kalen Starfire and Admiral Kalen Rhine. The Resistance, once a small group of rebels scattered across the galaxy, was now a growing force. Kalen and Kay. Alan's combined efforts had begun to take a toll on the Empire, but it was becoming clear that the fight was far from over. Their latest mission was perhaps the most dangerous yet. The Resistance had gathered intelligence about a vital Zorath military stronghold located on the planet Fiorin, a world rich in resources, where the Empire stationed its most advanced weaponry. If they could strike Fiorin and cripple the Empire's arsenal, it would set the Empire back years and give the Resistance the upper hand. But the operation would not be easy. Kalen's pulse quickened as she stared at the holographic map of Fiorin, her mind already racing through possible plans of attack. The planet was heavily guarded, with defense shields, planetary cannons, and a fleet of Zorath warships patrolling the skies. It would be a challenge to breach their defenses without suffering heavy losses. Kalen stood beside her, his face calm, as always, his mind working through the strategic possibilities. "We'll need a diversion," he said, his voice steady and authoritative. "A direct assault would be suicide. We'll create a window of opportunity for our forces to strike at their weak points." Kalen nodded. "I agree. A diversion should draw their attention away from the real target." She paused for a moment, considering the risk. "We'll need to hit them fast. One strike, and we'll have to be gone before they can retaliate." Kalen turned to face her. "And we'll need your instincts to guide us in the heat of battle. My plans will lay the groundwork, but in the end, it's up to you to lead the charge." Kalen met his gaze, feeling the weight of his words. She had always been the one to take charge in the midst of chaos, to trust her gut when the situation demanded quick thinking. But with Kalen's careful planning at her side, she felt more confident than ever. They were no longer just two leaders. Now, they were a team. The night before the mission, the atmosphere in the Resistance base was tense. Soldiers were preparing for what could be their most dangerous operation yet. The base buzzed with activity, everyone going over their roles one last time. Kalen walked through the war room, her eyes catching the faces of her fellow fighters. Some were seasoned veterans, others were new recruits, but they all shared one thing. The quiet hum of the Resistance base was broken by the sound of frantic footsteps echoing through the hallways. Kalen Starfire paced back and forth in the war room, her mind racing as she looked over the latest reports. The Zorath Empire had not only increased their offensive, but they had also revealed a new, terrifying weapon, a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was a weapon that could destroy entire planets, wiping out entire civilizations with a single strike. The intelligence was clear. The Zorath had completed construction on the celestial nova, a massive weapon designed to harness the energy of a dying star. This weapon could annihilate entire star systems, leaving nothing but cosmic dust in its wake. If the Empire deployed it, the consequences would be catastrophic. The galaxy could be forever changed, with whole worlds lost and the fight for freedom wiped out in one fell swoop. Kaylin clenched her fists as she stared at the holographic projection of the weapon. Its destructive power was overwhelming, and the Resistance had no time to waste. The only hope of stopping the Zorath Empire now was to infiltrate the weapon's location and destroy it before it could be activated. It was a mission that could cost them everything. Kalen Rhine, ever the strategist, entered the room with his usual calm demeanor. He studied the projection for a moment before turning to Kalen. "We have no time to waste. The Zorath will be launching the weapon within the next few days, and we cannot let it happen. We need to act quickly and decisively." Kalen nodded, but she could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The mission, to stop the celestial nova, was not only dangerous, it was nearly impossible. The Zorath base, where the weapon was being held, was heavily guarded, surrounded by fleets of warships and thousands of soldiers. The Resistance had no chance of taking on the Zorath Empire's full might head-on. If they were to have any chance of success, they would need to rely on their stealth, intelligence, and the element of surprise. "We can't do this alone," Kalen said, her voice low. "We need more allies. We need people who can help us infiltrate their defenses." Kalen turned to her, his eyes thoughtful. "You're right. We will need to be smart about this. If we can gather enough intelligence, we can weaken their defenses. Before we make our move." Kalen's mind raced as she thought of their options. The Resistance had made many allies over the years, rebel factions, sympathizers within the Empire, and even a few neutral systems that were growing tired of Zorath's control. But no matter how many allies they gathered, Kalen knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. If they were going to stand a chance, they needed a solid plan, and they needed to move fast. "We'll launch a covert operation," Kalen said, determination setting into her voice. "We'll send a small, elite team to disable their communications, sabotage their supply lines, and give us the opening we need to get inside the base." Kalen nodded. "I'll lead the assault on the outer defenses. You'll infiltrate the base itself with a select few. Once inside, we disable the celestial nova and destroy it. We'll have no time for second chances." Kalen took a deep breath. "It's a risky plan, but if we don't act now, the galaxy will be lost. We have to stop this weapon at any cost." As the plan took shape, Kalen began to assemble a team of elite Resistance fighters, each one hand-picked for their skills and courage. Among them was Talia, a former Zorath soldier who had defected after witnessing the horrors committed by the Empire. She was an expert in infiltration and sabotage, making her the perfect candidate to help Kalen get inside the base. Jarek, a sharpshooter with nerves of steel, would provide cover for the team from a distance, and Lara, a tech specialist, would handle the complex systems of the Zorath base, ensuring they could disable the weapon without triggering any alarms. The mission was set. In the dead of night, the Resistance forces moved out. The sleek stealth ships carrying the team cut through the blackness of space, their engines quiet and their paths carefully plotted to avoid detection. The Zorath Empire's defenses were formidable, but Kalen knew they had a chance if they were careful and precise. As they neared the enemy base, Kalen's heart pounded. The weight of the mission settled heavily on her shoulders. If they failed, the galaxy would fall to the Empire. But she couldn't afford to think about failure. She had led her people this far, and now was the time to see it through. The team made their way to the surface of the Zorath stronghold, sneaking past patrols and avoiding the Empire's detection systems. It was a tense, nerve-wracking journey, but they moved with purpose, never slowing down. The closer they got to the Celestial Nova's location, the more dangerous it became. Inside the base, the Resistance team worked quickly. Talia led the way, her knowledge of Zorath security systems proving invaluable as she guided them through locked doors and hidden passageways. Jarek provided cover as they advanced, taking out guards with precision from a distance. Lara hacked into the base's systems, disabling alarms and locking doors to keep the enemy off their trail. Kaylin felt the weight of time pressing down on her as they moved deeper into the heart of the base. Every moment brought them closer to their objective, but it also brought them closer to discovery. They couldn't afford to be caught. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the chamber where the celestial nova was housed. The weapon, massive and terrifying, loomed before them, its dark metal surface humming with energy. Kaylin's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the weapon that could bring the end of all things. "This is it," Kaylin whispered. "We disable the weapon, or the galaxy ends here." Lara worked quickly, her fingers flying across her console as she accessed the weapons systems. The countdown had already begun. They had no time to waste. With a final press of a button, Lara deactivated the weapon's primary power source. The hum of the celestial nova slowed, then stopped entirely. They had done it. They had disabled the weapon. But just as Kaylin exhaled a sigh of relief, a voice echoed through the chamber. "You're too late." A cold chill ran down Kaylin's spine. The voice belonged to General Vexnar, the brutal leader of the Zorath Empire. They had been caught, but it was too late to turn back now. The fight for the galaxy had only just begun. The dim glow of the resistance base was alive with activity. The war was no longer something that could be planned out in quiet strategy rooms. It was in every corner of the galaxy. After their daring mission to disable the celestial nova, Kaylin, Starfire's heart, raced with a mix of triumph and dread. They had won a significant victory, but the cost of that victory was beginning to show. In the aftermath of the mission, Kaylin and her team had returned to their base, but their faces were weary, their bodies bruised. They had escaped the grasp of the Zorath Empire, but not without consequences. The Empire had already retaliated, launching an assault on one of the Resistance's supply lines, destroying critical resources that could have kept their operations running smoothly. And, more painfully, Kaylin had lost many good people, brave men and women who had given their lives for the cause. Kaylin had always known the war would take a toll. She had witnessed the devastation firsthand and had made her peace with the fact that not everyone would make it. But now, the weight of those losses was crushing her in ways she hadn't expected. She could still see the faces of the fallen, hear their voices, and feel their absence in every step she took. As she walked through the base, Kaylin could feel the eyes of her fellow Resistance members on her. Some looked at her with admiration, others with uncertainty. She was the one who had led them into battle, the one who had sparked this war. And now, in the quiet after the storm, it was clear that the consequences of her actions were more than just numbers on a casualty report. They were lives lost, dreams shattered, and futures stolen. Kaylin Rhine, always calm and collected, had noticed the change in Kaylin. The fiery spark that had once burned so brightly in her had dimmed, replaced by the weight of guilt and grief. As a strategist, Kaylin understood the cost of war, but even he couldn't ignore the toll it was taking on Kaylin. "You've been quiet," Kaylin said one evening as they sat together in the war room, the soft hum of the base's systems filling the silence. "You're carrying more than just the weight of the mission. I can see it." Kaylin didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the map in front of them, tracing her fingers over the holographic projection of the galaxy. "We've won some important victories," she said finally, her voice tight, "but I can't help but feel like we're losing more than we're gaining. The Zorath are relentless, and every time we strike, we lose people who believed in this cause." Kaylin studied her carefully. "The cost of war is high. You knew that going in." "I did," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But when it's people you know, people you fight beside every day, it's different. I led them into this fight, and now they're gone." Kaylin nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "We can't change what's been done. What we can do is ensure their sacrifice wasn't in vain. The people who follow you believe in you, Kaylin. They follow you because they know you will lead them to victory. You can't carry every loss on your shoulders." She looked at him and, for the first time, saw a kind of understanding in his eyes, an understanding that went beyond strategy and tactics. Kalen had lost people too, in his own way. He had served under the Zorath, seen the horrors they inflicted, and had walked away from it all to fight for something better. He, too, knew the price of fighting for what was right. "I know," Kalen said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. I just need to believe it's worth it. All of it." Kalen didn't say anything for a moment. Then he spoke in his usual calm, measured tone. "Every victory we win brings us one step closer to ending this war. And every life we lose, every sacrifice made, adds weight to that victory. We are all part of something bigger. Your defiance has sparked this war, but it is our discipline, our unity, and our determination that will win it." Kalen let out a breath, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease just a little. Kalen's words, though simple, held truth in them. She had always believed that this war was about more than just her, about more than just the resistance. It was about the future of the galaxy, about ensuring that the people who came after them would never have to live under the boot of an empire again. The sacrifices made along the way, as painful as they were, would shape that future. "I don't know if I'm ready to carry all of this," Kalen admitted. "But I know I can't stop now. We've come too far." Kalen smiled, the first real smile Kalen had seen from him in days. "None of us are ready, Kalen. That's why we need each other. You have us. You're not in this alone." Kalen nodded, feeling the weight of his words. As much as the losses stung, as much as the burden of leadership pressed on her, she knew he was right. The war was far from over, and it was still her responsibility to lead the resistance toward victory. But she didn't have to carry that weight alone. The following days were filled with briefings, tactical plans, and more hard decisions. The resistance was still fighting for survival, but Kalen felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer just leading a rebellion. She was leading a movement for every person in the galaxy who had ever dreamed of freedom. As the resistance regrouped and strengthened, Kalen's resolve hardened. The sacrifices made by her people would not be forgotten. She would make sure of it. With Kalen's discipline guiding her and her own passion fueling the fire, they would continue the fight. And this time, they would not stop until the Zorath Empire was no more. The galaxy had witnessed the spark of defiance. Now it would see the power of that defiance, forged in the fires of sacrifice and tested by the unrelenting weight of war. Kalen's starfire and the resistance would rise, and when they did, the Empire would tremble. The final battle for the galaxy was fast approaching. After months of preparation, strategy, and hard-fought victories, Kalen Starfire and Kalen Rhine stood on the precipice of the most crucial moment of their lives. The resistance had grown stronger, its ranks swelling with new allies from across the galaxy. The Zorath Empire, though still powerful, had begun to show cracks. Every strike, every victory had left its mark on the once unstoppable force. But the Empire still held one last weapon, their overwhelming fleet, and the resistance knew that if they were going to win this war, they would need to face it head-on. Kalen stood in the war room, the holographic map of the galaxy projected. Before her, it was a tangled web of stars, planets, and military zones, but one spot stood out more than any other: the Zorath homeworld, Zalvoth, the heart of the Empire. The resistance had gathered its forces, ready for the final assault. Their goal was simple: defeat the Empire's fleet and destroy its leadership. But nothing in war was ever simple, and the road ahead was filled with uncertainty. Kalen felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was it, the turning point. If they won, the galaxy could begin to heal. If they lost, all would be lost. It was a risk that could change the fate of millions. "You ready for this?" Kalen's voice broke through her thoughts. He was, standing beside her, arms crossed, watching the map with the same focused intensity that had made him a legend among military strategists. Kalen glanced at him, her expression serious. "I'm ready, but the cost of failure is too high. We can't afford to lose." Kalen nodded, his gaze never leaving the map. "Failure is not an option. We've come too far, and we have one advantage that the Zorath don't: unity. They are scattered, weakened by their own arrogance. But together, we can strike." Kalen's heart swelled with pride as she looked at the fighters who had gathered in the base. Soldiers, pilots, technicians, and strategists. Each one of them had a role to play in the final battle. They were united, not just by a cause, but by a shared belief that the galaxy could be free from tyranny. Kalen knew that their strength came from each other, and that was something the Empire would never understand. The battle plan was set. The Resistance's fleet, though smaller than the Zorath's, was fierce and determined. They would make their move at the heart of the Empire, where their forces could strike at the core of Zorath power. It would be a risky maneuver, requiring precise timing and flawless execution. But with Kalen's strategy guiding them, Kalen knew they had a chance. As the Resistance ships began to launch, Kalen stood in the command center of the lead vessel, her heart pounding with anticipation. The vastness of space stretched out before them, an endless expanse filled with stars and the unknown. She glanced over at Kalen, who stood at the console, his face calm but his eyes sharp. He was as ready as he could be, his every thought focused on the task ahead. "We're almost in range," Kalen said, his voice steady. "Hold your positions." The tension in the air was palpable as the Resistance fleet moved closer to Zalvoth. Every ship in the fleet knew the importance of this mission. The Zorath had prepared for this moment, but they could not have predicted the unity and resolve of the Resistance. Kalen's pulse quickened as they neared the Empire's homeworld. The time for preparation was over. The time for action had arrived. Without warning, the first wave of Zorath warships appeared on the horizon, their massive forms blocking the stars behind them. Kalen's heart raced as she watched the enemy ships approach. The battle was about to begin, and there was no turning back now. "Launch, fighters," Kalen commanded. "Engage!" The fleet erupted into action as Resistance fighters launched. From their ships, racing toward the Zorath warships in a flurry of motion. The skies above Zalvoth became a chaotic mess of flashing lasers and exploding debris as the two fleets clashed in a storm of fire and steel. Kalen's breath caught in her throat as she watched the battle unfold. Her people fought with everything they had, each one risking their lives for a cause that they all believed in. She could feel their determination, their resolve. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future of the galaxy. But the Zorath were no pushovers. Their ships were massive, their firepower devastating. Resistance ships were torn apart as they engaged in fierce dogfights with the Zorath fleet. The sky was filled with the sound of explosions as ships collided, their hulls cracking under the weight of the assault. Kalen's eyes were fixed on the heart of the battle, where Kalen's plan was unfolding. The Resistance forces had been divided into several strike teams, each tasked with a specific mission. Some were to disable the Zorath communication systems, others to disrupt their supply lines. But the most important task was to take down the Empire's leadership, their flagship, the Dominion. As the battle raged on, Kalen could see that the Resistance was gaining ground. The Zorath fleet was slowly being pushed back, their ships retreating toward their homeworld. But Kalen knew the hardest part was still to come. The Dominion was still in play, its dark silhouette looming in the distance, and without it, the Empire's leadership would be decimated. "Move in on the Dominion," Kalen ordered. "All ships, prepare for the final assault." With a roar, Of engines, the Resistance fleet surged forward, racing toward the massive flagship. It was a dangerous maneuver, one that would put them directly in the path of the Empire's last line of defense. But Kaelin had no doubt in her mind that it was the only way to ensure victory. The final assault was a storm of fire as the Resistance fighters moved in, dodging fire and returning blast after blast. The Dominion loomed large before them, its weapons aimed directly at the Resistance ships. The tension was thick in the air as the ships neared their target. Then, with a final, powerful push, the Resistance fighters launched their last attack, and the Dominion exploded into a massive ball of fire, sending shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The Zorath fleet fell into chaos, and the Resistance emerged victorious. The galaxy had witnessed the rise of a new power, a power forged from the unity of those who refused to live in fear. Kaelin Starfire had led them through impossible odds, and now the galaxy was free. As Kaelin stood on the bridge of the Resistance flagship, watching the smoke clear from the battlefield, she knew one thing for sure. The war was over. The Zorath Empire had been defeated, and a new era had begun. The galaxy was no longer shackled by tyranny. The future was theirs to shape. The battlefield was silent. The once thriving heart of the Zorath Empire now lay in ruins, the remains of their mighty fleet scattered like debris across the galaxy. The Resistance had done what many thought impossible. They had defeated the seemingly invincible Empire. But while the stars above were calm, the victory below was bittersweet. The war had cost them much. Too much. Many good men and women had given their lives for this cause, and Kaelin Starfire felt the weight of their sacrifices pressing down on her with every breath. In the aftermath of the battle, the galaxy stood at a crossroads. The Zorath Empire was no more, but the question of what came next was still unanswered. The victory had been hard-earned, and the road ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear. The galaxy would never be the same again. Kaelin stood on the balcony of the Resistance flagship, staring out into the vast expanse of space. The stars seemed to shine a little brighter now, as if they were celebrating the end of the long, brutal war. But for Kaelin, there was no celebration. She had led them through the fire, but she was still haunted by the faces of those who had fallen. She knew they had won, but the cost of that victory had left its mark on her soul. She was joined by Kaelin Rhine, who had been at her side throughout the war. His calm presence was a steadying force for her, even now in the quiet aftermath. He stood beside her, his eyes reflecting the same mixture of pride and sorrow that she felt. "The Empire is gone," Kaelin said softly, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "We did what we set out to do." Kaelin nodded, but there was no satisfaction in her response. "We've won. But at what cost? So many lives were lost, so much destruction. The galaxy is free, but can it ever truly heal from all of this?" Kaelin didn't answer right away. He understood the depth of her grief. They had both seen the horrors of war, the destruction, the death, and the heartbreak. But they had also witnessed the incredible strength of the people who had fought alongside them. He placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her a quiet comfort. "The price of freedom is always high," Kaelin said, "but we've done something no one thought was possible. We've broken the chains of oppression, and now it's up to us to rebuild." Kaelin turned to face him, her expression resolute. "You're right. We've won the battle, but the real work begins now. The galaxy is free, but it's fractured. There are systems still suffering under the weight of the war. There are people who have lost everything. We can't just leave them behind." Kaelin nodded in agreement. "It will take time, but we can do it. We've shown that unity is our greatest strength. Now we must rebuild with that same spirit of cooperation. We have to ensure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated." Kaelin looked out at the galaxy once more, her gaze steady and unwavering. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be those who sought to take advantage of the Empire's fall. There would be challenges, both political and social, as the galaxy tried to find its way after the war. But Kalen also knew that the people of the galaxy were resilient. They had fought for their freedom, and they would fight to ensure that it lasted. "We'll need to bring everyone together," Kalen said, her voice filled with determination. "We need a new order, one built on the values we fought for: equality, justice, and peace. The galaxy deserves that. We won't let the Zorath's legacy of tyranny define us." Kalen smiled, the faintest hint of pride in his eyes. "I believe in you, Kalen. I always have." Together, they turned back to the bridge where the leaders of the resistance were gathered. It was time to set a course for the future. Kalen knew that her role as a leader had only just begun. The galaxy had been freed, but now it was up to her and her allies to ensure that the foundations of the new order were strong. Over the following months, the galaxy began to rebuild. The systems that had once been part of the Zorath Empire were now free to chart their own course. The Resistance, now a coalition of various factions and systems, worked tirelessly to establish new governments, focusing on unity and cooperation rather than division and control. It was a slow process, but with each passing day, the galaxy took another step toward healing. Kalen traveled to many of the former Zorath-controlled worlds, meeting with leaders, diplomats, and citizens alike. There were challenges along the way, of course. Old wounds that needed to be healed, disagreements that had to be resolved. But Kalen never wavered in her belief that a better future was possible. She spoke of hope, of rebuilding, and of the importance of remembering the lessons learned from the war. She also took the time to honor the fallen. Memorials were built for those who had given their lives for the cause, their names etched into the walls of new cities and peaceful worlds. Kalen ensured that their sacrifice would never be forgotten, that the galaxy would always remember the price of freedom. As the years passed, Kalen found a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. The galaxy was no longer under the shadow of the Zorath Empire. The people were free, and though there was still much work to be done, Kalen knew they were on the right path. She and Kalen stood together, watching as a new era began. The stars above were no longer just distant points of light. They were symbols of the galaxy's new hope, a hope that had been won through sacrifice, through defiance, and through unity. And as the galaxy looked to the future, Kalen knew that she had done her part. The war was over, and the galaxy had been set free. The new order had begun. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and obstacles. But Kalen was no longer afraid. She had seen the strength of the people, the power of unity, and the possibility of a brighter future. And she knew that, no matter what, they would continue to fight for a better tomorrow. Together.